I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Turkish street protesters make news all around the world, except, as it turns out, in Turkey. The Bradley Manning court-martial gets underway, and the Pentagon keeps coverage to a controllable minimum. What, if anything, is wrong with this picture? We'll look at the digital manipulation of news images, the ethical questions, and a web video of the week that will teach you how to get the red out. When Turks first hit the streets in Istanbul for what would turn into large-scale anti-government demonstrations, domestic media outlets did not just bury the lead, some of them ignored it. They pretended the story was not worth covering, or they pretended it simply wasn't happening. And many of the protesters eventually descended on Turkish media outlets, delivering the message right to their doorstep. Over his 3 terms in office, Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has taken a once noisy and opinionated Turkish media corps and gradually brought them to heel, to the extent that Turks involved in the political unrest offer compelling evidence that their mainstream media were trying to keep the public in the dark on a news story that was covered around the globe. Many Turks turned to social media for news updates, prompting the Prime Minister to describe Twitter as a, quote, menace to society. Our starting point this week is the base camp for the protest movement, Taksim Square in Istanbul. The demonstrations began over the Erdogan government's plans to turn a park, one of the few remaining green spaces in Istanbul, into a shopping mall. Then came the fighting, the running street battles with police, the tear gas, the casualties, the arrests. And the lack of coverage, at least initially, exposed the shortcomings of journalism in Tayyip Erdogan's Turkey.
It erupted about 8-9 around the Gezi Park. At that time, most of these big channels, NTV, Haberturk, CNN Turk, etc., were basically continuing the usual coverage as if nothing has been happening in their surroundings and in Istanbul.
The TV channels had, one of them I remember very distinctly, had this gourmet show. The other had a conversation going on about cosmology. The news were breaking, but the news channels were not breaking it.
Here was Istanbul erupting in street fights, everyone mobilized, and the 24-hour news shows were showing documentaries about penguins. It was, it was surreal.
I think it was really funny to see CNN International, the screen there, with a good picture of what's happening in Taksim, and then CNN Turkey with a good picture of penguins. 2 TV screens simultaneously showing 2 completely different things.
The disaster of the mainstream media was pretty clear, and people were questioning angrily what on earth the mainstream media was dealing with. So this was, I think, perceived clearly as a humiliation or insulting the intelligence of the public. And you could see it on Twitter that the rage was increasing.
The news that circulated on Facebook, on Twitter, involved a lot of sensationalist pictures, which half of them were not true, or they were from other protests before in Turkey, or even some cases from other countries. And that caused a lot of havoc, that caused a lot of hysteria and intense sensitivities too.
Tabii bu sosyal medya denilen şey aslında şu anda toplumun ve toplumların bana göre baş belasıdır.
It's quite ironic. Here's a man who has hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers calling Twitter the greatest disaster since mankind arose.
I think that was a scandal that the Prime Minister of Turkey said that social media is a menace to society. But I think there's a context to it. What's, I think, led him to say that was that during these protests, there were also many false news spread through Twitter. For example, the news that police killed a lot of people, police executed people on the streets, which was not the case. So these are the negative sides of social media, and probably from that, Prime Minister said something like that.
But that problem is, in the first instance, created by the vacuum that the news channels basically left out there by turning a blind eye to the events. It was very clear from the first instance on that there was a blackout. There was a very major case of self-censorship.
Prime Minister Erdogan is far from the only political leader to try to control the media. He has succeeded where others have failed for reasons that are legal, but more importantly, commercial. Turkey has laws that restrict reporting on issues such as the Kurdish separatist movement. There's a statute known as Article 301 that bans the publication of anything that insults Turkishness. It is vaguely worded and has been applied liberally against authors as well as journalists. The larger issue, however, is structural. Most Turkish news channels are owned by conglomerates, mega corporations whose relatively minor media holdings are dwarfed by their other larger concerns, such as construction firms and energy companies. Those conglomerates do a lot of business with the government, and therefore they have good commercial reasons to stay on Prime Minister Erdogan's good side.
There is certainly in Turkey a government manipulation of mainstream media. I wouldn't go as far as saying a total control of mainstream media, but there is manipulation. In what sense? Well, the government, unfortunately, by using its financial resources, economic resources, its leverages, have put pressure on large media groups. And like previous governments in the past, this current government, Erdogan government, did not shy away, unfortunately, from using that economic leverage they had to put pressure on mainstream media to force them to have a relatively more pro-government line.
All throughout the protests in Taksim Square, we see angry protesters attacking news reporters, television cameras, and transportation vehicles. So what we saw is an increasing sense among the Turkish public that the mainstream media has failed to report what is happening because of their own business interests. There is a huge number of people who are disillusioned, who are looking to find a platform to raise their concerns and their voices, and they're not able to find it neither in the political structures or in the media or any legitimate outlet.
Media proprietors have interests. They don't make money off the media they own, but on the influence that it buys, and therefore they're not going to offend the government. And so what we're seeing is that people aren't really getting the news. The newspapers are not a forum for public discussion. They're basically mirrors to show the government in a good light. And of course, what suffers? Turkish society suffers.
On June 3rd, protesters converged on one of Turkey's largest news channels, NTV, over its lack of coverage. The next morning, the head of the channel, Cem Aydın, issued this statement. NTV has disappointed its viewers. The criticisms are largely right. Our responsibility to this profession is to deliver what is happening. Our audience feels betrayed, and it's not possible to find them wrong. NTV then ramped up its coverage, but Turks still hit its parent company where it hurts. The company also owns Guarantee Bank, Turkey's third biggest lender, which reported 1,500 canceled bank cards and $16 million in withdrawals. The Listening Post requested interviews from NTV on this story, as well as government officials. No one was made available. When Taksim Square erupted, Prime Minister Erdogan faced a political problem, and the Turkish media faced a challenge. Initially, they failed to meet their responsibilities until they were shamed into reporting the story. But Turkey's media problems go beyond politics. And as long as media owners continue to do big business with the government, there is little reason to believe that the next time a story like Taksim Square comes along, the coverage will be any better.
If people are brave enough to react spontaneously like that, the publishers, the owners of media outlets, conglomerates, the big businessmen of Turkey should also be brave enough to cover what the people are saying.
Our Global Village voices now on the politics of media in Turkey.
The most striking thing about the use of social media in Turkey during the protests has been the sheer volume of tweets, as well as the way that they've been used to overcome a lack of coverage on the part of the mainstream media. The vast majority of tweets have been in Turkish, so it really has been a local phenomenon, and it's not surprising that Erdogan thinks that social media is something to worry about.
Turkish people were already some of the most active users of social media in the world. So when the protests came about, it was natural for them to tweet, to check in their location on Facebook, and to share their experiences of what was going on. The problem with that was that there was a huge amount of misinformation going around. One big rumour that went around was that the police in Ankara were using Agent Orange, the chemical deployed by the US in Vietnam back in the 1960s. And it was that kind of misinformation that the Prime Minister was describing when he'd called social media a menace.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. For anyone with an interest in journalism, freedom of expression, and the media phenomenon that is WikiLeaks, The court-martial of Private Bradley Manning taking place near Washington, D.C. is the trial of the year. But the U.S. military has severely limited media access. Over 350 accreditation requests were filed, only 70 press passes issued. 2 stenographers paid by crowdfunders through the Freedom of the Press Foundation were denied passes, but did manage to get into the media center and transcribe via video by borrowing press passes from other news organizations. The transcripts are available on the Freedom of the Press Foundation's website. Among the news organizations that did get in was the New York Times. However, the paper's ombudsperson, Margaret Sullivan, criticized the Times for not providing sufficient coverage. Prior to the trial's opening, she tweeted a link to a pre-trial article from the Los Angeles Times. 6 months ago, Sullivan called out her paper for ignoring Manning's pre-trial hearings. She wrote that Bradley Manning's testimony is dramatic and the overarching issues are important. The Times should be there. An Egyptian court has issued a 6-month jail sentence to a prominent blogger and opposition activist on charges of insulting President Mohamed Morsi. It is the first such sentence since Morsi took office a year ago. During countrywide protests in February, blogger Ahmed Duma went on television and called the president a killer and a criminal. He was taken to court based on a complaint filed by a member of Morsi's Freedom and Justice Party who said that he felt personally insulted by Duma. The court that sentenced Duma said his comments were a threat to state security. Bail was posted at $720. Duma has said he will appeal the judgment. Under President Morsi, 4 times as many charges of insulting the president have been filed than during the 30-year-long Mubarak era. 2 months ago, an arrest warrant was issued for popular TV satirist Bassem Youssef for insulting the president. However, after many protests and a good deal of mockery, those charges were dropped. In the Gulf state of Qatar, a draft cyber crime bill has been approved by the executive cabinet there and has sparked concern from media watch groups. The Qatari Cabinet of Ministers says the draft law is designed to fend off attacks on state websites and information systems. However, other clauses in the draft not relating to hacking have caused alarm. The law would punish anyone who, quote, infringes on social principles or values or who posts stories related to the sanctity of the private and familial life of persons, even if they were true. The U.S.-based Committee to Protect Journalists wrote a letter to the Qatari Prime Minister saying countries throughout the Middle East and beyond look to Qatar as a media leader. Qatar should affirm its position by ensuring that the cybercrime bill does not impinge on a free and open internet, which is a necessary condition for the exercise of press freedom and freedom of expression. A major American newspaper has fired its entire photography department, and it's replacing it with reporters armed with iPhones. On May 30th, 28 full-time staff photographers at the Chicago Sun-Times were told that they were out of a job and that all remaining editorial employees would go through mandatory training in iPhone photography basics, filming, video editing, and social media. Among the shooters sacked was Pulitzer Prize winner John H. White. His photographs of life in Chicago in the 70s and 80s won him that award in 1983. The statement from management said the Sun-Times business is changing rapidly, and as a result, we have had to restructure the way we manage multimedia. But the Chicago Newspaper Guild called it a terrible move for the paper and community, and said the Guild had filed a legal notice against the paper. The Sun-Times has been in business in Chicago since 1844. The late American writer Susan Sontag once said that to photograph is to frame, and to frame is to exclude. She was saying that as a medium, photography is and always has been subjective. However, in the digital era, there is a new and growing subjectivity in photojournalism, one that you've most likely seen but not necessarily noticed. It's called post-processing. It's when photographers digitally enhance their work to make it more captivating to the eye. The practice has raised some ethical questions within the industry, and embodying the debate is the winner of the 2013 World Press Photo Award. It shows a burial procession in Gaza last year, and it was digitally enhanced to the point that the photographer was accused of submitting an image that was in fact a composite. That clearly was not an issue for the judges, which tells you how much this industry has changed. However, the question does linger. When it comes to digital enhancement, where should photojournalists and news organizations draw the line? The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on this year's World Press Photo Awards and the growing use of post-processing in photojournalism.
The World Press Photo's annual contest is considered the world's biggest and most prestigious competition in press photography. The aim, as the exhibition travels the globe, is to get people talking about the stories, the images, and photojournalism. This year's winning entry did all that. Some people called the photo a fake. It was taken by Swedish photographer Paul Hansen in Gaza and showed a funeral procession for members of a Palestinian family killed in an Israeli airstrike. There was something about the composition and lighting that seemed surreal. But what Hansen did was to keep superimposing the same image on itself until he achieved the desired effect.
He essentially overlaid the same picture multiple times to reveal the most detail out of both the dark and light areas, simulating the way humans can see. That's what he tried to do, and that's interesting, quite experimental, almost pioneering. The fact is that for the past 50 years we've been used to seeing photos that are a product of that chemical process, and anything that strays from that scares us.
The strength of this image is in putting together the many elements which record the tragedy of the Palestinians, the grief of the families. All this connects strongly with the viewer's emotion and empathy. But I think that the post-production is bothersome. The purpose of the photographer should be to bring the viewer in, but in this case, he's distanced.
There we get into the area of taste. How much of this enhancement do you accept? How much do you, does your editorial policy allow for? And for some, he's crossed the line. For others, he hasn't. But it's, I would say, almost impossible to draw an absolute line that can or can't be crossed. And that is an ongoing discussion.
At the center of the discussion over post-processing, the art of digitally retouching images, are photo labs like 10B Photography in Rome. This digital darkroom, as they've come to be known, does the kind of enhancing used by Paul Hansen. Founders Francesco Zazzola and Claudio Palmisano say that what they do is editorial photography. They say their work remains within the realm of photojournalism because they do enhance color, but they don't add or remove pixels from the images.
Photography, both digital and analog, creates a matrix. In the analog era, these were called negatives. In the digital era, they're called raw files. We use complex, modern, advanced instruments which can radically change an image. We use them in a journalistic context and know their limitation. We voluntarily apply limitations to the tools offered by these technologies because journalism can only be different from simple photography through a set of ethical values.
Our method is such that we have to think about how every picture is and could be. We don't fall for the way the digital negative is automatically produced. Every time we start from scratch, that's our strength. We don't consider the starting point as more real than any other point of view. The starting point is just an automatic process by Canon or Nikon or whatever the camera brand. That's what makes us different.
But it's still volatile territory because even subtle modifications to a photograph can change our interpretation of it. For example, in 1994, during the trial of American footballer O.J. Simpson, who was accused of murdering his wife, two leading US publications, Newsweek and Time magazine, ran the same mugshot of the athlete on their front covers. However, by tweaking the color and the contrast of the image, the publications led their readers down two very different editorial lines.
The idea of crime in the US is often tied to African American communities. So by darkening his skin, they highlighted this element, his belonging to that racial group. There are ethical values set by common sense, and an application of these digital tools should be subservient to ethics and the will not to mislead or simply reinforce established stereotypes.
Keep colors as close to their original state as possible. The ethical lines seem straightforward. But when you consider that one of the most flagrant manipulations of color is to shoot in black and white, and yet we don't question the integrity of monochromatic images, the issue becomes complicated. So then the line becomes, don't manipulate the pixels, don't add or remove objects or colors. But even that line can be blurred.
After the Boston bombings, some newspapers ran images of that event, and the newspaper didn't want to offend anyone, so they removed severed limbs from the photographs. Now, I would say that either run the photo as it was or don't run the photo. I think once you get into a situation where you're pulling stuff out of an image, it's a bit worrying. Because once again, it's supposed to be photojournalism. It's supposed to be journalistic.
We've had episodes in war photos where explosions have been doubled up, the smoke was extended, the sky darkened to make everything even more shocking and grand. This attitude is in conflict with the authenticity of the photo reporter, who already takes enormous risks to be in that place and shouldn't be made to seek extra enhancements for the testimony of a situation.
Our demand for visual perfection can be traced back to fashion photography with a nip and a tuck here and an airbrush there. But photo manipulation has a long, dubious history, be it Stalin's censors removing an out-of-favor Soviet politician after his execution, or a state-owned Egyptian newspaper giving Hosni Mubarak a place of undue prominence at diplomatic talks, or Iran trying to make a missile test look more successful than it actually was. These days, though, photography has become a much more crowded and competitive place. Camera phones, citizen journalists, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, we are constantly bombarded with images. Photojournalists are struggling to stand out and are pushing the limits. Ultimately, we have to remain cognizant that when looking at a picture, be it in fashion or the news, that the medium is easily manipulated.
There's a difference between the human eye and the photographic eye, which is obviously a manipulation straight away, whether you choose to shoot in colour, whether you choose to shoot in black and white. With modern digital cameras, compared to the old film cameras, you can shoot in very low light. So these are all things to take into account when actually looking at an image.
Photojournalism is about truthfulness, and you're seeing extremely bright colours. Ultimately, there's a big risk of undermining your message, and that's a fine line that the photojournalistic community has to find between attracting attention and stepping over that line and undermining your integrity.
Photography is not reality, it's a subjective medium, and for now, how it is used will always depend on who is using it, and the tools, the growing number of tools at their disposal.
More Global Village Voices now on news photography in the digital age.
Many photographers still subscribe to a more old-school approach, seeking as little manipulation as possible. But in the modern age of digital photography, the processing aspect has become a much larger component of an image's DNA than it ever has before. In the past, most manipulation or retouching came from Photoshop. Now photographers have greatly been able to expand the capabilities as to what they're able to do to an image in the develop process. More and more images every year are becoming this mixture of photojournalism and fine art.
With regards to Paul Henson's image, I feel that it is acceptable photojournalism in so much as that he has photographically kept the intrinsic facts of the image and applied no more post-processing than any other image we might see in the media today.
Finally, why should professional photographers have all the fun? You too can digitally manipulate your photographs, do away with blemishes, red eye, or the spare tire that's marring your waistline. A couple of years back, the people at collegehumor.com posted a music video for a tune that they call Photoshop Tutorial Rap. CMY Killa and his crew of effects gurus school a few people on the tricks of a very misleading trade. Forget subjective photography or minor digital enhancement. These guys take it to a whole new level where unicorns can come to life. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Oh, my eyes are red. How am I supposed to put these pictures on Facebook? Yo, I hear you got a problem. Who are you?
Yo, I'm CMY Killer, here to answer all your prayers. So import this Phoenix follow, open up a new layer. When it comes to red eyes, I know just the fix. Back and let me channel mix. I get yourself a brush, make it soft and white, and dab away that red till it looks alright.
This commission is too hard. Harder than this unicorn's diamond hard horn.
Yo, oh damn son, that unicorn's tight.
No, something's missing, it's still not right. The line art's fine, but the magic's not there.
Well, I'ma teach you some spells, get about that shit. I've been needing some help to bedazzle this horse. Good thing my whole crew's about to show up in force. Roll call. My boy Lens Flair gonna shock your screen. And you know Plastic Rapper gonna give it some sheen. Filter Phil's got the thrills if you know what I mean. And Lil Dis Speckles here to keep things clean. DJ Dodge is here with MC Burn. They be filling with the skills you be yearning to learn. Yo, word, Merchant Blur gonna take a turn. Noise boys in the house, y'all get concerned. We got the Rasterizer, MC Brush Effects, Sean Quick, Mass Killer, and all the rest. Gonna take this uni to the level next.
You see to the M to the Y to the killer.